She's just a nurse. That's what Vincent Hargrove said the first time he noticed Ashley Cooper at River Street Station's medical response office, tucked between the northbound platform and the maintenance corridor, where the fluorescent lights hummed their endless mechanical song and the smell of antiseptic mixed with diesel exhaust from the trains below. 11 months she'd been here. 11 months of treating tourists with heat stroke, of talking anxious travelers through panic attacks, of applying ice packs and taking vitals and handing out bottles of water like she was running a convenience stand instead of a medical post. Just a nurse. The River Street station served 43,000 commuters daily, give or take. The medical office was a 12 by 14 space with a stretcher, a defibrillator mounted on the wall, 3 shelves of supplies, and a desk where Ashley kept her documentation meticulous and her presence invisible. She wore the same 2 navy polo shirts most days, her hair pulled back with a rubber band, no makeup, no jewelry except for a single tarnished coin she kept in her front pocket, worn smooth from years of handling. When she moved without sound. When she spoke, people had to lean in to hear her. Vincent Hargrove had built his authority on the opposite principle. He was loud. He was everywhere. His office on the administrative level overlooked the main concourse, and he spent most of his day walking the platforms, clipboard in hand, talking into his radio about protocol deviations and procedure violations. He wore his transit authority uniform like armor, creased and immaculate, his name embroidered in white letters. His connections to the board ran deep. His sister-in-law sat on the Transit Authority Oversight Committee, his old fraternity brother was the district city council representative, and he made certain everyone knew it. A word from Vincent Hargrove could end careers at River Street Station. Ashley had never given him reason to notice her. She followed protocols. She kept her medical bay clean. She submitted her supply requisitions on time. And for 11 months, Vincent Hargrove had left her entirely alone. The first crack appeared on a Tuesday in September. A man had collapsed on the platform near the northbound entrance, a diabetic who'd skipped breakfast and missed his medication. Ashley was there within 40 seconds, she'd been restocking the oxygen tanks in the back office, and the sound of the body hitting tile carried through the thin walls. The man was seizing when she reached him, his body rigid and convulsing, his eyes rolled back white. The station security guard, a former military man named Torres, was already calling 911. How long? Ashley asked, kneeling beside the patient. Started maybe 15 seconds ago, Torres said. Still going. She moved with the fluid precision of someone who'd done this 1,000 times before, her hand steady as a surgical laser. She cleared the airway, positioned him on his side, timed the seizure. 42 seconds. 61 seconds. At 93 seconds, she reached into her supply bag and pulled out a 10 mg dose of midazolam in a pre-filled syringe. The seizure stopped within 6 minutes. The patient's blood sugar was dangerously low, she knew it before checking the glucometer. She had juice and crackers ready when he regained consciousness, monitoring his vitals with the practiced ease of someone for whom this was not a surprise but a routine event. By the time the ambulance arrived 8 minutes later, the man's condition had stabilized. His pressure was 118/76. His oxygen saturation was 98%. His hands had stopped shaking. The paramedics loaded him onto their stretcher with professional efficiency. One of them, a young man with a thick Boston accent, glanced back at Ashley. "What did you do here?" "Glucose tabs, juice, monitoring," she said. "He's stable." "You're not paramedics." "Nurse." "Station medical." The paramedic nodded, made a note, and wheeled the patient out toward the ambulance bay. Standard protocol. Textbook response. The kind of thing that should have earned Ashley a quiet commendation and nothing more. But Vincent Hargrove had been standing near the security desk when the seizure started. And he had watched Ashley work. He arrived at the medical office 40 minutes later, after the ambulance had left and the platform had returned to normal. Torres was logging the incident in the station book. Ashley was replenishing her depleted supply stock. "I need to speak with you," Vincent said, his voice carrying the particular weight of institutional authority. "In my office." The walk upstairs took 4 minutes. His office was all polished oak and window views, the kind of space designed to intimidate. He sat behind his desk without offering her a chair. She stood. The incident on the platform, he began, flipping through a file. The man who seized. You administered medication. Midazolam. 10 milligrams. Within scope of nursing practice, Ashley said quietly. Station protocol allows nurses to administer emergency benzos in acute seizure situations. Yes, he said, tapping his pen against the desk. I'm aware of what the protocol allows. My question is why you felt comfortable making medical decisions that fall outside basic first aid. He leaned back in his chair, studying her with the kind of scrutiny that made the air pressure change. Your application materials indicated you were a standard medical response nurse. Licensed practical nursing, basic certification. Your background doesn't reflect the kind of training required for emergency medication administration. Ashley's jaw tightened, a small movement, barely perceptible. I have my nursing license. The medication administration is within my scope. Your license, he said, is current. Yes. But your references, your work history, all of that went through standard channels. And yet you seem to possess skills that suggest something else entirely. He turned to his computer, scrolled through something. Your previous employer, St. Catherine's Memorial in Seattle, I called them yesterday. Interesting thing. They have no record of you. I worked there for 3 years, Ashley said evenly. No. No, you didn't. Not according to their files. So either you falsified your employment history, or you're hiding something. He smiled, the kind of smile a wolf makes before it shows its teeth. Which is it? The silence lasted exactly 6 seconds. Long enough for the subway rumble below to vibrate through the floor, long enough for Ashley to understand that Vincent Hargrove had begun digging, and that he would keep digging until he found something he could use. She'd been invisible for 11 months. Now she had his full attention, and it was the wrong kind of attention. The kind that did not let go. My previous work involved specialized contracts, she said carefully, choosing each word like a person walking through a minefield. Those records aren't standard public access. Specialized contracts. He leaned forward, his eyes bright with the thrill of leverage. How interesting. You know, I've found that people with specialized contracts that aren't subject to standard inquiry are generally the people I need to watch most carefully. He gestured toward the door. We'll be conducting a more thorough review of your employment history and your medical qualifications. In the meantime, I'll need a written explanation of your training in advanced medication administration. By end of business Thursday. Ashley left his office and returned downstairs to the medical bay. She cleaned and recleaned the shelves. She updated her logs. She checked the defibrillator batteries. And she kept her hand away from the challenge coin in her pocket, because if she touched it right now, her hands would not stay steady, and Vincent Hargrove was already looking for reasons to question her composure. 2 days later, a man came through the station at 2:43 p.m. He wore a marine dress uniform, which was unusual for the subway. His left sleeve carried a tattoo in dark blue ink. Ashley saw it when he was 40 feet away, saw the letters clearly from across the platform, A. Cooper, Helm and Province, 2014. She looked away. She did not watch him walk past her medical office. She did not follow him to his train. And when he boarded and the doors sealed behind him, she sat very still in the medical bay, the tarnished coin in her pocket suddenly feeling heavier than it had any right to be. The coin felt heavier in her pocket the next morning. Ashley arrived at River Street Station at 6:16 a.m., 2 hours before her shift, the way she always did. The subway platform was empty, just the echo of her shoes on tile and the hiss of climate control pushing stale air through vents. She unlocked the medical bay, a small glass-walled office overlooking the main concourse, and began counting bandages that didn't need counting. That's when Station Manager Vincent Caldwell appeared in her doorway. He was tall in the way men become when they've never been told no, his tie perfectly Windsor knotted, his shoes polished to a mirror shine. Behind him came 19 other staff members, administrative assistants, security, custodians, platform agents. They filed into the medical bay like a courtroom assembly, their presence suddenly suffocating in the small space. "Staff meeting," Caldwell announced. "Full attendance." Ashley set down the bandage box. "Meeting isn't scheduled until tomorrow. Plans change." His smile was the smile of a man who'd never experienced the word no. "We're discussing operational excellence. I thought we'd start with a case study." The staff shifted, uncertain. A custodian named Marcus glanced at Ashley, then away. A platform agent named Chen stared at his shoes. Nobody wanted to be here. But Caldwell had called them, and Caldwell was the kind of man people obeyed. "Ashley," Caldwell said, his voice suddenly public, suddenly performative. "Stand up." She stood. "For 11 months, you've been our medical responder. 11 months of treating tourists for dehydration and the occasional anxiety attack." He began pacing, his shoes clicking on the tile with metronomic precision. "Which is fine. That's the job. But you developed a concerning pattern of unauthorized medical decisions." The commuters outside the glass stopped walking. They could hear the tone in his voice, the contempt, the orchestrated cruelty. A woman with a suitcase pressed her face closer to the glass. "Last month," Caldwell continued, "you performed emergency stabilization on a diabetic patient without waiting for paramedics. Without consulting hospital protocol. Without authorization from anyone with actual credentials." "He was seizing," Ashley said. Her voice was even. "Status epilepticus. 30 seconds more, Anne." "I'm not finished." Caldwell's jaw tightened. He hadn't expected her to speak. "The week before that, you submitted a supply requisition 30 minutes past the deadline. 30 minutes. Do you understand what that does? It disrupts the entire procurement cycle. It shows a disregard for the systems that keep this station functioning." Marcus's face had gone red. The platform agent Chen was studying the floor like it contained the secrets of the universe. "And then," Caldwell said, turning to address the entire room now, not just Ashley, "there was the matter of your lunch break last Tuesday. You extended it by 4 minutes. For minutes past the allotted 30. That's a pattern. You don't follow procedures. You don't respect authority. You make decisions that should be made by people with actual medical licenses." The words landed like stones in still water. Ashley's jaw clenched, not much, just the smallest tightening at the hinge. Her hand stayed perfectly still at her sides. Her face remained blank as stone. She didn't look away from Caldwell, and she didn't look down. "You see," Caldwell said, addressing the staff now but performing for the commuters beyond the glass, "this is what happens when we hire without proper vetting. When we bring in people who don't understand hierarchy. Who think they're more important than the system itself." A security guard shifted his weight. The tension in the room had become a physical thing, pressure pushing down from the ceiling. "From this point forward," Caldwell said, "every decision you make will be documented. Every minute late. Every procedure deviation. Every single thing you do that falls outside protocol gets filed. Because we have standards here, Ashley. Standards that matter." He turned and walked out, the staff following him like ducks in his wake. They filed past her without meeting her eyes. Marcus paused at the doorway, opened his mouth as if to say something, then kept moving. The glass walls of the medical bay suddenly felt very small. Over the next week, Caldwell's documentation became a ritual. He appeared in the medical bay at random times, clipboard in hand, his eyes scanning for violation. Ashley administered an antihistamine for a severe allergic reaction, he noted it. She organized the supply closet more efficiently than protocol dictated, he documented it. She answered a call button 3 minutes before her shift technically ended, he recorded it, time and date stamped, his handwriting sharp as razor wire. "Just doing my job," he'd say, his smile never wavering. "Making sure everything's above board." The other staff began treating her differently. Not overtly hostile, but distant. As if her proximity to Caldwell's scrutiny might somehow infect them. The vending machine became a test case. She was filling the medical bay supply bin with bottled water on a Tuesday morning when Caldwell appeared with Chen trailing behind him. "Interesting choice," Caldwell said, watching her stock the bottles. "Bottled water. That's not on the approved supply list. It's for patients in shock. They need hydration. It's not approved. You're unilaterally deciding what supplies you need without submitting a requisition form." He turned to Chen. "Did you see that? Unauthorized purchasing." Chen said nothing. His shoes were very interesting today. "Next time," Caldwell said, his voice dripping with false concern, "just ask. Let someone with decision-making authority approve these things. I know you're trying to help, but this is exactly the kind of pattern I'm concerned about. You think you're above the rules." He left. Chen didn't follow immediately. When he finally moved toward the doorway, he whispered without looking at her, "He's building something." On Thursday of that week, security arrived. Not to help. To escort. Caldwell had filed a report requesting that Ashley submit to random bag checks before and after her shift. Policy compliance, he called it. The security guard, a woman named Torres, looked profoundly uncomfortable as she searched Ashley's backpack, finding nothing, as they both knew she would. "I'm sorry," Torres said quietly. Ashley zipped the bag. "Don't be." But Torres was. The search happened every day for 5 days. Each time, Torres looked more ashamed. Each time, Ashley's composure remained unbroken. Her hands didn't shake. Her voice didn't crack. She simply handed over the bag, retrieved it, and returned to work. The worst moment came on Friday afternoon, during the evening rush. Caldwell appeared in the medical bay with a printout in his hand, his face flushed with the kind of anger that came from a man who discovered he couldn't break someone who'd already been broken and rebuilt by harder hands. "The security footage from your break last week," he said, his voice low now, dropping the public performance. "You were gone 37 seconds longer than allotted. 37 seconds. Do you understand what this looks like? Do you understand what people will think when they see a pattern of someone who doesn't respect basic authority?" Ashley looked up from the medication log she'd been reviewing. Her eyes met his, and for just a fraction of a second, something shifted in her expression, not fear, not shame, but something harder. Something that made Caldwell take a small step back. "Is there anything else?" she asked. He left without answering. That night, at 2:13 a.m., the first ambulance arrived screaming into the station's emergency dock. Not tourists this time. Military. A transport vehicle pulled by 2 Marine escorts, and they were carrying a man whose uniform was soaked black with blood, whose breathing had become a wet whistle through punctured lungs, whose eyes were locked on something only he could see. The intercom crackled, "Trauma activation. All available medical personnel respond." Caldwell was asleep in the administrative office. He stumbled out pulling his jacket on, his face still creased from the pillow, confused by the chaos. The Marines were moving with controlled precision, their movements economical and exact. A colonel emerged from the transport vehicle, his presence suddenly making the fluorescent-lit subway platform feel like a forward operating base. "We need immediate intervention," the colonel said, his voice carrying the weight of command. "He's got a ruptured aortic. We need a pericardiocentesis or he's dead in minutes." Caldwell stared. The other staff members who'd arrived, 2 paramedics and a nurse named Jackson, looked at each other. The colonel had just asked for a surgical procedure that wasn't taught in basic paramedic training. That wasn't performed in subway stations. "We're not equipped for that," Caldwell said, finding his authority somewhere in the chaos. "We need to get him to a hospital. Cedar Creek Medical is 6 minutes away." 6 minutes he doesn't have, the colonel said. His eye swept the room and landed on Ashley, who was already moving toward the patient, already assessing, already pulling equipment. "You. Move." The patient was the same man. The one with the tattoo on his arm. Caldwell stepped forward. Absolutely not. She's not authorized to. Step back, Ashley said. Her voice had changed. It was deeper now, carrying the weight of command, the voice of someone who'd made worse decisions under better circumstances than a fluorescent-lit subway platform. Jackson, get me a 14-gauge angiocath needle and a syringe. Jackson was already moving. The paramedics were already responding. Even Caldwell, despite himself, stepped away from the patient. Her hands moved with the kind of precision that comes from muscle memory. The patient's breathing was shallow now, his blood pressure dropping, his oxygen saturation at 63% and falling. She found the insertion point, the fifth intercostal space, midclavicular line, and her hands moved as if they'd done this 1,000 times. Because they had. The needle went in. The hiss of air escaping. Blood draining into the syringe, pressure releasing, the patient's oxygen saturation climbing. 68, 74, 82, breathing easier now, the wet whistle becoming simple breath. Get him to Cedar Creek, she said, already stepping back. Cardiothoracic team. Tell them he needs emergency repair of the aorta. Tell them he's got maybe 40 minutes if we're lucky. The colonel stared at her. The Marine stared at her. Jackson stared at her with his mouth slightly open, understanding that what he'd just witnessed wasn't basic first aid. It was something else entirely. Caldwell's face had gone pale. His mouth opened and closed like a fish pulled from water. Ashley set down the syringe and turned away, moving back toward the medical bay with the kind of calm that follows survival, the same calm she'd shown when his words had rained down like stones and she'd simply stood there unmoved. She didn't see the colonel's expression shift. She didn't see him reach for his radio and speak for words that would change everything. Phantom 7. Confirmed. Moving now. The room went dead silent. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead like trapped insects, and in that moment, Caldwell realized he'd been standing in front of a weapon the entire time, never understanding what he was holding. Commander James Whitfield collapsed on the platform at 2:13 a.m., his body folding like a dropped marionette between the yellow safety line and the track edge. The fluorescent tubes overhead cast their sickly phosphorescent glow across his face as blood began pooling beneath his ribs, dark, arterial, spreading across the tile in a pattern that told the story immediately to anyone who knew how to read it. A ruptured aortic aneurysm didn't announce itself. It simply devoured you from the inside out. Ashley was at the vending machine on level B2, 30 yards away, feeding coins into the slot with the mechanical precision of someone who'd stopped sleeping 3 days ago. $2.76 for black coffee that tasted like burnt diesel. She heard the impact first, not the sound of a body hitting the platform, but the sound of a mind recognizing catastrophe. It was the silence that followed. Passengers screaming has a rhythm. The absence of screaming means someone has already accepted they're watching death arrive. She moved before thought. The coffee dropped forgotten beside the machine, and her body was already crossing the platform, reading the scene as she walked, pooling blood volume suggesting massive internal hemorrhage, the angle of his chest cavity indicating something had ruptured high in the mediastinum, his skin already taking on that grayish-white pallor of profound shock. 2 minutes. Maybe 3 before his heart stopped trying to pump around the pressure building inside his pericardium. The fluid surrounding his heart was filling, compressing, strangling. Call 911, she said, not to anyone specific. Just the instruction hanging in the air like a command that would execute itself. A transit worker in a blue uniform had his phone out already, fumbling through the digits. Ashley dropped to her knees beside Whitfield, her hands moving across his torso, reading the geography of his ribs like braille. Her fingers found the landmarks without hesitation, the third intercostal space, the midclavicular line, the exact map her muscle memory had been carrying for 18 years without permission to use it. Whitfield's eyes were still tracking. Conscious. Dying. His mouth opened to speak and she silenced him with a look that held the weight of command. Don't talk. Don't move. I'm a medical officer. The word slipped out like water finding its path downhill. Medical officer. Not nurse. Not station staff. Officer. She saw the micro-shift in his pupils, recognition trying to surface through the fog of shock. His lips moved. Nothing came out. She was already moving back toward the medical station, her stride eating the distance in 8 seconds flat, her mind already cataloguing what she needed. The emergency kit was locked in the cabinet behind the desk. She knew every item, every placement, because she'd stocked it with military precision 6 months ago when she arrived at this job pretending to be someone who'd never learned how to save lives in the dark. A 14-gauge angiocath needle. Alcohol prep pad. Nothing else. That was all she needed. That was all she'd ever had in Helmand Province either. She was back at Whitfield's side in 19 seconds. Her hands were steady in a way that made the transit worker step backward. People notice steadiness at moments like this. They noticed when panic didn't touch her face. "Everyone back," she said, and her voice had dropped an octave without her permission. It carried authority that contradicted her job title entirely. "Give me space. Now." They moved. People always moved when they heard that tone. She'd never understood why. It was just a voice, just a frequency of sound waves, until she realized it was recognition operating on a deeper level. Something in that pitch said, "This person has stood in worse places than this. This person will not let you die if her hands can stop it." The alcohol pad came out of the kit. She swabbed the area with the precision of someone who'd done this in a cave lit by a single red-filtered flashlight, with nothing but gauze and intention between a dying Marine and the extraction point 3 miles away. Whitfield's eyes tracked her movements. She could see the understanding dawning in his pupils, not who she was, but what she was. "This is going to feel like pressure," she said, positioning the needle at the junction between the ribs, angling it just slightly toward his left shoulder. "Not pain. Pressure. Your body will understand the difference." The needle went in with the kind of smooth penetration that meant everything was aligned perfectly. No resistance. No grinding against bone. Just the small pop of the pericardial sac giving way, and then the hiss of air escaping as the accumulated blood released its stranglehold on his heart. Immediately, subtly, his breathing changed. His oxygen saturation began climbing. "Get me a bag," she said, not looking at anyone. "Any bag. Plastic. And tape." Someone thrust a crumpled CVS bag into her line of sight. She attached it to the needle's hub, creating an improvisational one-way valve that would let blood drain out but not air suck back in, a field dressing for an internal wound, the kind of solution that only existed when textbooks couldn't help you and your patient would die if you waited for protocol. The oxygen monitor beside them, the one someone had ripped from the wall and pressed into Whitfield's arm, began its climb. 68%. 72. The cardiac monitor someone had retrieved showed the rhythm straightening, regularizing, his heart no longer compressed into mechanical failure. "Get me a second line," she said. "Large bore." The kit in the break room. "Run." The transit worker sprinted. Ashley kept her hand steady on the needle, her eyes tracking the rise of Whitfield's oxygen numbers like she was watching a building come back from fire. 75, 81. 85, each percentage point was his heart regaining the ability to think, his brain cells refusing to die, his systems catching the briefest possible reprieve. Whitfield's eyes found hers. Really found hers this time, consciousness returning like a man breaking the surface of dark water. "You." He started. "Don't talk," she said. "Paramedics are 6 minutes out. You're stabilizing. That's all that matters." But it wasn't what she was thinking. What she was thinking was that his eyes had registered something. Some recognition that lived beneath the shock. His right arm lay at his side, and she could see the tattoo on his bicep, her name in green ink, faded from 18 years of sun and sweat and time. 8 Cooper, Helmand Province, 2014. Written across his skin like a memorial. Like a debt. She'd carried him 3 miles through Taliban-held territory with a sucking chest wound that she'd sealed with her own hand and a strip of duct tape from an ammunition crate. She'd carried Martinez and Chen and Rodriguez too, but Whitfield's was the name she'd been ordered to forget. The name that had been erased from the official record when the Pentagon decided that some operations never happened, that some soldiers needed to vanish, that some wars were better fought by people the government would never acknowledge. The other nurse, Patterson, came running back with the 4 line, but she slowed when she got close, something shifting in her expression as she watched Ashley's hands move with the kind of precision that didn't match the vending machine attendant in the medical office. Ashley established the line without looking up, her movements economical and exact, the muscle memory of trauma surgery operating on autopilot. BP is rising, someone said. Ashley's pulse monitor confirmed it. 88/52. Still catastrophic, but stabilizing. Still alive. Who are you? Patterson asked. Ashley didn't answer. She was already watching Whitfield's chest rise and fall with better oxygen saturation now, her mind already calculating what came next, how to keep him stable for the ambulance ride, how to transfer care without exposing the fact that she'd just performed emergency thoracic intervention with a needle and a plastic bag, how to explain her hands moving like they'd done this before. The sirens were audible now, still 3 minutes away, but getting closer. Whitfield's eyes never left her face. There was something in them that said he was trying to place her, trying to make the math work between the name on his arm and the nurse kneeling beside him, trying to understand why someone would know exactly where to put a needle into his chest cavity like she'd learned it on a battlefield instead of in a classroom. Ashley didn't flinch. Didn't blink. Didn't acknowledge that anything unusual was happening. She just kept her hand steady on the needle, kept watching his numbers climb, kept doing what she'd been trained to do in a war the government had erased. The paramedics would arrive in 2 minutes and 43 seconds. In that time, James Whitfield would regain enough consciousness to start asking questions. In that time, Ashley would disappear back into the role of nurse, letting the ambulance take him, letting the hospital take over, letting the moment of recognition fade into the confusion of trauma. But she could already feel it, the unraveling of the mask. The thing she'd built so carefully for 18 years, the identity she'd worn so flawlessly that even she had almost believed it. In 2 minutes and 43 seconds, everything was about to change. Hargrove's footsteps echoed across the tile before she even finished withdrawing the needle. His face was purple. Not red, purple, the color of someone whose entire reality had just collapsed in front of 20 witnesses and a Marine commander who was breathing again because Ashley had done something he couldn't begin to understand. The syringe came free. The blood released. Whitfield's oxygen saturation climbed on the monitor. 92, 94. 97, sinus rhythm. Normal. Stable. The room had gone absolutely quiet. Hargrove pushed through the crowd like a man possessed, his voice already dialing before his hands even reached his sides. Ashley watched him move away from her position at the station, watched his phone rise to his ear, his jaw working as he spoke rapid fire into the receiver. She didn't hear the words. She didn't need to. She knew exactly what he was doing. She'd seen men like him before, men whose authority depended on hierarchy staying rigid, on everyone understanding their place. She'd disrupted the order by being too capable. By knowing more than she should. By being the wrong kind of competent in the wrong kind of moment. Within 2 hours, 3 investigators arrived with leather folders and expressions that suggested they'd already decided what they were looking for. They set up in Hargrove's office, she could see them through the glass partition, and started pulling her employment file. Every form. Every certification. Every background check that had come back clean because the Pentagon had spent considerable resources making sure it would. Hargrove sat across from them, his voice carrying through the station in that particular way of men accustomed to being listened to. He was describing her actions as criminal assault. Practicing medicine without proper licensure. Operating beyond the scope of civilian paramedic certification. The words kept coming, each one a thread he was pulling, trying to unravel everything. By hour 4, he was on the phone with her listed references. Ashley watched from the medical station as he spoke to people she hadn't contacted in 18 years. People who knew fragments of who she'd been before. He asked them if they found it unusual that she'd disappeared from her previous field of work entirely. If they knew she had military training. If they could account for the 7-year gap in her employment history. She could see his face from where she stood, could watch the satisfaction building as each reference confirmed what he already suspected, that Ashley Cooper had secrets. That her credentials were real but her history didn't make sense. That something was very wrong with the story she'd told. The security footage request came at 5:33 p.m. Hargrove had it pulled from the server and was walking it through frame by frame with the investigators, pointing out moments where her hands moved with precision that didn't match a standard medical responder's training. Where she'd issued commands to doctors instead of following orders. Where she'd positioned herself like someone who had done this before. Many times. In places that weren't clean, modern transit stations with proper lighting and equipment. Ashley cleared her locker in silence. They didn't ask her to leave yet. That came in a formal letter delivered by a transit authority lawyer at 6:13 p.m. Her employment was terminated effective immediately. Violation of protocol. Operating beyond her scope of practice. Potential assault on a passenger. The words on the paper were precise and efficient. Hargrove had done good work. He'd built his case carefully, using her own competence as the weapon against her. She removed her badge. Turned it over in her hands one last time. The ID photo was 18 months old, taken when she'd first arrived at Cedar Creek Medical with paperwork the Pentagon had personally verified. A normal nurse in a normal uniform for a normal life. She set it on the counter. Her scrubs went into the duffel bag that suddenly contained everything she'd built in this place. 2 pairs of shoes. A windbreaker. The challenge coin she kept in her locker behind the shelf where no one would see it. The coin was tarnished from 43 years of being carried in combat pockets, retrieved from wreckage, held in shaking hands during operations that official records said never happened. It was stamped with an insignia that would mean nothing to anyone here. Just a piece of worn metal to a civilian eye. But to her it meant helm and province. It meant the 7 Marines she'd carried to extraction points. It meant the 3 she couldn't save despite everything she'd done. It meant the operation that had been officially erased from every database, buried so deep that even the Pentagon's highest ranks pretended it never occurred. The drive to the parking garage was automatic. Her Honda was 12 years old, the kind of vehicle that didn't draw attention. She sat in the driver's seat with her forehead pressed against the steering wheel, her hands holding the challenge coin so tightly her knuckles went white. The garage was empty. Just her and the echo of the ocean somewhere beyond the concrete structure. Rain had started while she was inside Cedar Creek Medical. Not a light rain, a real storm, the kind that hammered the pavement in sheets and turned Savannah into a place that looked like it was drowning. She couldn't turn the key. Couldn't start the engine. Couldn't drive to the apartment she'd rented under a name that wasn't quite her real name, wasn't quite a complete lie. Her phone buzzed. A text from a number she'd been told never to contact. But the message was automatic, the kind that came every 12 months on dates she recognized. She didn't open it. She never did. The coin was still in her hand. For 18 years she'd kept it close. For 18 years she'd followed orders. Disappeared into civilian life. Became Ashley Cooper, medical responder, quiet and reliable and nobody special. She'd healed people without using the full extent of what she could do. She'd saved lives using only the skills a nurse was supposed to have, even when she could have done so much more. The restraint had been the hardest part. Not the hiding. The restraint. She thought about throwing the coin out the window. Letting it fall into a storm drain and disappear the way the Pentagon had wanted her to disappear. The way she'd disappeared. A Master Chief Petty Officer who no longer existed in any official capacity. A woman with a classified history and an erased file. Everything about her that mattered was documented nowhere. The coin caught the light from the parking garage fluorescence. For just a moment, she could see the insignia clearly. Angel 6. The call sign they'd given her before everything went classified. Before the operation that killed 2 of her teammates and erased 4 others from the historical record. Before the Pentagon had decided that some wars were too sensitive to acknowledge and some soldiers needed to vanish. Rain hammered the windshield. She was holding something real when everything else had become smoke. A physical reminder that she hadn't imagined it. That it had been real. That Helmand Province was real, and the Marines she'd carried were real, and the 7 miles of hostile territory she'd moved through with Whitfield bleeding out against her shoulder was real, even if no government document said so. She pressed her forehead against the steering wheel again and breathed. Not crying. Soldiers don't cry. Her eyes burned, but she forced them dry. The parking garage smelled like oil and rain. Like endings. Like the moment before something broke permanently. And then she heard it. A sound that started low and rose higher, a rhythm that didn't belong in a parking garage. A helicopter. No, multiple. The sound of rotors cutting through rain, heading toward the station. Toward her. She lifted her head from the steering wheel. Her hand tightened around the challenge coin. She didn't move. Didn't start the engine. Just sat there in the darkness with her forehead still slightly bowed, listening to the sound grow louder, knowing with absolute certainty that everything was about to become visible. The helicopter rotors shook the terminal's vaulted ceiling at 3:22 p.m. on a Wednesday. 3 black Suburbans pulled to the curb outside the main entrance, doors slamming in synchronized percussion, and 8 Marines in dress blues moved through security with a kind of authority that made guards step sideways. They didn't run. They didn't hurry. They moved like men who had spent decades entering rooms where nobody wanted them to be. In the legal conference on the 3rd floor, Dr. Caldwell was mid-sentence to the transit authority lawyers, his voice carrying that particular pitch of satisfaction that comes from signing termination papers. She performed an unauthorized medical procedure without licensure. Criminal negligence. The liability alone justifies immediate. The elevator doors opened. A Marine colonel stepped into the hallway, his uniform pressed so sharp it looked like origami folded from titanium. The other 7 Marines flanked him without instruction, muscle memory from 1,000 missions burned into their spines. Dr. Caldwell's words died mid-sentence. He'd never seen military dress blues that close before. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. The colonel walked past the conference room without looking inside. His boots echoed on the polished floor, the click, 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 the sound of absolute certainty. He descended to the subway station's medical office where Ashley was clearing her locker, the last of her supplies fitting into a cardboard box smaller than anyone expected. Her hands were steady. They'd been steady through worse. The Marine colonel pushed open the medical station door. The air pressure changed. Every person within 20 feet felt it, that terrifying fluid precision that comes from having survived things civilians can't imagine. His eyes found Ashley's. Phantom 7, he said clearly, each word a command. You're needed. Not a request. A recall. The retired gunnery sergeant working terminal security, Martinez, 15 years in reconnaissance before 3 surgeries ended his career at 41, went rigid. His hand moved instinctively toward the spot where his sidearm used to sit. He'd heard that call sign exactly once before, in a briefing room that no longer officially existed. His voice carried through the station's vaulted ceiling like a rifle shot. That's Master Chief Petty Officer Cooper, sir. The words hung there. Master Chief Petty Officer. Not nurse. Not office worker. Not the quiet woman who'd been publicly eviscerated 6 weeks earlier while Caldwell read from his documentation folder like a prosecutor at a trial nobody asked for. Commander James Whitfield walked forward then. He was still moving slowly, the ruptured aortic aneurysm had left him with limited cardiac reserve, but his eyes were clearer than they'd been since the collapse. He pulled up his left sleeve with his right hand, the movement deliberate, controlled. The tattoo had been reinforced recently, the lines crisp and black against the scar tissue underneath. 8 Cooper, Helmand Province, 2014. Her name. Their history. This woman carried me and 3 other wounded Marines through 9 miles of hostile territory after our convoy was destroyed, Whitfield said. His voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. We took shrapnel. She took shrapnel. 3 pieces embedded in her lower back that she never reported because the operation was classified. Buried by the Pentagon. She was ordered to vanish. To become just another nurse in another city while the men she'd saved went home and built lives. The silence lasted exactly 10 seconds. Then the investigator from the Transit Authority's legal team, a woman named Kowalski who'd been hired to document Caldwell's case against Ashley, looked down at her briefcase. Her jaw tightened. She'd been reading Caldwell's employment file for 6 hours. Something had bothered her. A pattern. Not the pattern he'd documented about Ashley. A different pattern. Missing maintenance invoices. Supply requisitions that didn't match inventory. $47,000 in discrepancies over 3 years. Dr. Caldwell, Kowalski said quietly, we need to talk about your own records. Caldwell's face went the color of wet concrete. He'd been competent for months, strategic, methodical, weaponizing the system he understood perfectly. But competence has an expiration date. It ends the moment someone looks deeper than you expected. The investigators started pulling files. Not just from the last 6 weeks. Everything. The maintenance contracts Caldwell had approved despite bids that didn't match his recommendations. The medical supply purchases marked as emergency orders at premium prices. The pattern revealed itself like a photograph developing in chemical solution. $53,000. $61,000. $82,000. The colonel turned to Caldwell. You weaponized an institution to destroy someone you were afraid of. And in doing so, you exposed yourself. It wasn't a threat. It was a statement of fact. The Marines don't forgive institutional corruption. Federal investigators will be here in approximately 40 minutes. They take white-collar crime very seriously when it involves military personnel and classified operations. Caldwell started talking then. His voice climbed in pitch. He'd been so controlled before, so measured in his humiliations of Ashley. Now he screamed about procedural confusion and accounting errors and misunderstandings. Saliva collected at the corner of his mouth. His hand shook as he gestured wildly, no longer the administrator weaponizing authority but a man watching the ground collapse beneath him. One of the Transit Authority lawyers stood up and walked out without a word. The second followed. Kowalski stayed and took notes while Caldwell's voice broke into actual sobs. The federal investigators arrived at 4:07 p.m. NCIS badges. FBI credentials. They moved through the station like men accustomed to finding what people had buried. They placed handcuffs on Caldwell's wrists, the metal clicking with terrible finality. His colleagues watched from behind glass doors as they escorted him toward the exit, his dress shoes scuffing against the tile floor, his voice repeating I wasn't, this was, over and over like a broken ventilator alarm nobody could silence. 6 months later, Ashley boarded a train at Union Station in Washington, D.C. She wore her dress blues. The uniform fit perfectly, it had been tailored specifically for this ceremony, this formal recognition of what the government had finally admitted it had buried. The colonel had submitted the paperwork personally. Bronze Star. Silver Star. 2 Purple Hearts. Navy Cross. The Navy Cross was the 4th highest military decoration in the United States. For valor in combat operations against an armed enemy force. For carrying for wounded Marines through 9 miles of hostile territory while maintaining fire superiority and treating cardiac tamponade with supplies that shouldn't have worked in a cave without electricity or light. The medal was heavy. It meant something. At River Street Station, Dr. Caldwell was setting up a folding table outside the terminal entrance. Supplemental transit insurance. He'd been fired from Cedar Creek Medical a day after the investigators left. His license had been suspended pending a disciplinary hearing. No hospital in Georgia would hire him. The unemployment benefits had run out. His ex-wife had taken the house in the divorce settlement that followed 2 weeks of his lawyers trying to negotiate away the inevitable. He was calling to commuters now, his voice hoarse and desperate. $5 extra coverage. Accident protection. Family medical benefits. Nobody stopped. Nobody looked at him. He was nobody now. Just a man with a folding table and a name tag that read Steve. He flinched every time someone addressed him as doctor out of old habit, the flinch of a nerve never quite healing. Ashley's train pulled away from Union Station at 6:13 p.m., heading north. The metals clinked softly against her chest as the car swayed. She looked out the window at the city sliding past, the Potomac River, the monuments, the evidence of a country that had finally decided to acknowledge what it had tried to bury. Martinez had texted her before she left. A single message, "Welcome home, Master Chief." She didn't text back. She just held the phone and watched the sun drop toward the horizon, painting the sky the color of old blood cleaned with time. The trembling wasn't fear. It was restraint. Years of holding everything tight while pretending to be someone small enough to fit inside a box someone else had drawn. The restraint of a woman who could have destroyed Caldwell's career with a phone call but had instead let him destroy it himself by being exactly what he'd always been. Scars tell stories. Some of them are on your skin. Some of them are in the decisions you make about who you let yourself become when the world stops watching. The ones who have seen the worst often give the most. Subscribe for more stories about the ones we overlook. Like this video if you believe the quietest person in the room might be the most dangerous. Comment, if you had Ashley's power and Caldwell's shame, what would you have done differently?